Xavier Montgomery stared at his phone, replaying the voicemail for the third time, and he could not explain why her voice made him feel like he had been drowning his entire life and just now learned what air tasted like. The message was not meant for him. That much was obvious. A woman named Fiona was calling someone named Marcus, her voice breaking with exhaustion as she explained she would be late to their lunch meeting because her car had broken down on the highway and the tow truck was taking forever. She apologized profusely, her words tumbling over each other in that way people do when they are stressed, but trying to hold it together. There was something raw in her tone, something genuine that cut through the practiced politeness most people used in professional voicemails. Xavier ran a hand through his dark hair, aware that he was being irrational. He was the CEO of Montgomery Pharmaceuticals, a company he had built from the ground up after his father tried to sabotage his early career. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals with stone-faced investors, had fired executives without blinking, had been featured on the cover of Forbes 3 times. He did not get distracted by wrong number voicemails, but he pressed call anyway. The phone rang twice before she answered. "Hello." That voice again. Xavier found himself standing up from his desk, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago. "Hi. This is going to sound strange, but you just left me a voicemail by mistake. I think you were trying to reach someone named Marcus." There was a pause, then a soft, embarrassed laugh that did something to his chest. "Oh my God, I am so sorry. I must have hit the wrong contact. That is mortifying." "Do not be embarrassed," Xavier said, surprised by how much he meant it. "Is everything okay? You mentioned being stranded." "I am fine. Just having the kind of day where everything that can go wrong does go wrong, you know," she sighed, and he could hear traffic in the background. "The tow truck finally showed up about 10 minutes ago, so at least there is that." Xavier should have said goodbye. Should have wished her well and hung up. Instead, he asked, "Where are you headed?" "After the car situation, back to the flower shop I own, Flourish, over on Maple Street." I had gone to meet with a supplier about getting better wholesale prices on roses, but now I am going to be so late getting back that my assistant is probably pulling her hair out. She paused. "Why am I telling you all this? You are a complete stranger." "Sometimes that makes it easier," Xavier said, which was something he would never normally say. He prided himself on being private, guarded. "I am Xavier, by the way. Fiona Fairchild." They talked for another 20 minutes. Xavier learned that Fiona had opened her flower shop 3 years ago after leaving a soul-crushing corporate marketing job. She loved the work, but the margins were razor-thin, and days like today when everything went wrong made her question whether she had made a massive mistake walking away from steady paychecks. She was funny in a self-deprecating way, honest about her struggles without being pitying. Xavier found himself telling her things he rarely discussed. How he had built his company as much out of spite as ambition, determined to prove his father wrong. How sometimes success felt hollow when you spent most of your time in meetings and very little doing the actual science he had fallen in love with in graduate school. "I should let you go," Fiona finally said, though she did not sound like she wanted to. "Thank you for this." Weirdly, talking to a stranger about my disaster of a day actually helped. "Can I call you again?" Xavier asked before he could stop himself. Another pause. "You want to call me again? You do not even know what I look like." "I know what you sound like," Xavier said. "I know you care about getting good prices for your customers. I know you laugh when you are embarrassed instead of getting defensive. That seems like enough to want to know more." "That is either really sweet or a red flag," Fiona said, but he could hear the smile in her voice. "Sure. Call me again, Xavier, who I still do not know the last name of. Montgomery, Xavier Montgomery." The silence stretched so long Xavier thought the call had dropped. Wait, Xavier Montgomery as in Montgomery Pharmaceuticals. That's Xavier Montgomery. Yes. I accidentally called a billionaire and complained about my car problems. Perfect. That is absolutely perfect. She was laughing now, but it sounded slightly hysterical. You must think I am ridiculous. I think you are real, Xavier said, which is rarer than you would imagine. They said goodbye, and Xavier stood at his window for a long time after, phone still in his hand. His assistant Jennifer knocked and poked her head in, reminding him about his 3 o'clock with the board members. Xavier nodded absently, his mind already planning when he could call Fiona again without seeming desperate. He waited 2 days, which felt like an eternity. When he finally called, she answered on the first ring. I was wondering if you would actually call back or if I imagined that whole conversation, Fiona said. It was real. How is your car? Still in the shop. Apparently the transmission is shot and it is going to cost more to fix than the car is worth. She did not sound as defeated as he expected. But I have been biking to work, and honestly, it has been kind of nice. I forgot how much I like mornings before the city fully wakes up. They fell into an easy rhythm over the following weeks. Xavier would call her in the evenings after he finished work, which was usually around 8 or 9. Fiona would be closing up the shop or at home in her small apartment, which she described as organized chaos with plants on every available surface. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about the wedding she was doing flowers for that weekend. A same-sex couple who had been together for 15 years, and were finally getting married now that the groom's conservative parents had come around. He told her about the new drug his company was developing that could revolutionize treatment for a rare autoimmune disorder. You actually care about the medicine part, Fiona observed one night. I can hear it in your voice when you talk about the science versus when you talk about the business side. The business is necessary, Xavier said. But yes, the science is why I got into this. Why do you not do more of it then? It was a simple question, but it lodged in his brain. Why did he not? Because he was the CEO, because he had responsibilities, because the company needed him focused on strategy and growth. But also because he had gotten so caught up in proving himself, in building an empire, that he had forgotten what the empire was supposed to be for. I do not know, he admitted. Maybe you should figure that out, Fiona said gently. They had been talking for almost a month when Xavier realized he was in trouble. He was sitting in a meeting with his executive team, discussing their expansion plans into European markets, and all he could think about was how Fiona would probably have some funny story about a customer who wanted flowers arranged to spell out an apology to their cat. He contributed to the meeting on autopilot, aware that this was not like him. Xavier Montgomery did not do distracted. He did not do unfocused. He definitely did not fall for women he had never met in person. That night, he called her with a proposition. I want to meet you. Fiona was quiet for a moment. I have been wondering when you would ask. Is that a yes? It is a terrified yes, she said. What if we meet and there is no chemistry? What if I am completely different in person? What if you are not? Xavier countered. They agreed to meet for coffee the following Saturday at a small cafe Fiona suggested in her neighborhood. Xavier spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear, finally settling on jeans and a dark blue sweater that Jennifer had bought him last Christmas, insisting he needed clothes that did not scream corporate overlord. He arrived 15 minutes early and ordered a black coffee he did not drink, too nervous to do anything but watch the door. When Fiona walked in, he knew her immediately even though they had never exchanged photos. She had wavy auburn hair pulled back in a loose braid, freckles scattered across her nose, and she was scanning the cafe with an expression of such open anxiety that Xavier felt his own nerves settle. She was nervous too. He stood up, and her eyes found him. For a second, they just looked at each other. Then Fiona smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and crossed the cafe toward him. "You are taller than I imagined," were the first words out of her mouth. Xavier laughed. "You are exactly what I imagined." They sat down, and the first few minutes were awkward in that way first meetings always are when you have built up so much anticipation. But then, Fiona started telling him about the elderly woman who had come into her shop yesterday, insisting she needed flowers for her husband's grave, and also could Fiona recommend a good place to meet men because being a widow was boring. The story was funny and sweet and sad all at once, and Xavier found himself relaxing into the conversation the same way he did on the phone. "Can I be honest about something?" Fiona asked after they had been talking for over an hour. "Please. I Googled you, obviously. And I saw all these photos of you at galas and charity events, always with some model or actress on your arm. I kind of convinced myself that this was just entertainment for you. The billionaire amusing himself with the broke florist." Xavier felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I have not dated anyone seriously in 3 years. Those women at events are usually friends or colleagues or sometimes just whoever my publicist thought would photograph well. It is all surface level." He leaned forward, needing her to understand. "What we have been doing, these calls, getting to know you, this is the most real thing in my life right now." Fiona studied his face and he let her look, did not hide behind the polished mask he usually wore. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, I believe you." They stayed at the cafe until it closed, then walked around Fiona's neighborhood for another hour. She showed him her shop, which was closed for the day, but she unlocked it to let him see inside. It was small but beautiful, every corner thoughtfully arranged. There were buckets of fresh flowers in the cooler, ribbons organized by color, vases of all sizes lining the shelves. "This is yours," Xavier said, awed in a way he had not expected to be. "You built this." "It is not exactly a pharmaceutical empire," Fiona said with a self-conscious laugh. "It is your empire. That matters just as much." The look she gave him then was so tender, so open, that Xavier knew he was completely gone for this woman. They started seeing each other regularly after that. Xavier cleared his schedule in ways that made Jennifer raise her eyebrows and ask pointed questions about whether he was finally taking her advice to have a life outside work. He would go to Fiona's shop in the evenings and help her close up, learning the difference between roses and peonies, how to cut stems at the right angle, why certain flowers could never be arranged together because they would kill each other. Fiona came to his penthouse apartment one night, and he watched her take in the space with wide eyes. It was admittedly excessive, all marble and floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the Chicago skyline that had cost him $8 million. "You actually live here?" she asked. "It looks like a hotel." Xavier looked around, trying to see it through her eyes. She was right. It was impersonal, cold. He had bought it because it was the penthouse in the most exclusive building in the city, because it was what a successful CEO was supposed to have. But he had never made it a home. "I sleep here," he said. "I do not know if I would call it living." Fiona walked to the windows, pressing her hand against the glass. "The view is incredible, though." Xavier came up behind her, not quite touching but close enough to feel her warmth. "I barely notice it anymore." She turned to face him, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. They had not kissed yet, had barely touched beyond accidental brushes of hands. Xavier had been letting Fiona set the pace, aware that his world and resources could be overwhelming. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. "I've been waiting for you to ask that for 2 weeks," Fiona whispered. Her lips were soft, and she tasted like the mint tea she had been drinking earlier. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative. But then Fiona made a small sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer, and Xavier stopped thinking entirely. His hands went to her waist, holding her steady as he deepened the kiss. Nothing in his life, no deal closed or milestone reached, had ever felt as right as this moment when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Fiona laughed shakily. Okay, that was worth waiting for. They moved to his couch, which was stiff and uncomfortable because he had never actually sat on it long enough to notice. Fiona curled into his side, fitting there like she had always belonged, and they talked until 2 in the morning. Xavier told her about his mother, who had died when he was 12, and how his father had never recovered, had poured all his grief and rage into the family business and into trying to mold Xavier into his image. Fiona told him about her parents, who lived in Oregon and still did not quite understand why she had given up her good job to play with flowers, but who loved her anyway. "I want to meet them," Xavier said. Fiona pulled back to look at him. "You want to meet my parents? Is that too much?" "I know we have only been doing this officially for a few weeks, but I am 41 years old, Fiona. I am too old to play games or pretend I do not know what I want." He cupped her face, running his thumb along her cheekbone. "I want you. I want this. If that scares you, tell me and I will slow down." "It terrifies me," Fiona admitted, "but not enough to run. My parents are coming to visit next month for my birthday. You can meet them then if you are serious." "I am serious." The next few weeks were a blur of stolen moments between Xavier's work commitments and Fiona's shop demands. He started leaving board meetings early to have dinner with her. She started asking her assistant Emma to close the shop so she could spend evenings with him. They cooked together in his sterile kitchen, Fiona laughing at how he measured every ingredient precisely, while she just threw things in pans with reckless abandon. They went to movies and museums, and once to a Cubs game where Xavier surprised Fiona by actually knowing the players' names and statistics. "You are a baseball fan?" she asked, delighted. "My mother used to take me to games," Xavier said. "Before she got sick. I have not been to one in years." Fiona laced her fingers through his. "We should come more often then." It was the we that got him. The casual assumption that they would keep doing this, building a life together. Xavier had never lived with anyone, had never even considered it. But one night, watching Fiona try to fold his fitted sheets and failing spectacularly, he found himself saying, "Move in with me." Fiona dropped the sheet. "What? Move in with me?" "Not here," he added quickly, looking around the penthouse. "Let's find somewhere together. Somewhere that feels like a home, not a showpiece." "Xavier, I can barely afford my current apartment. I cannot split rent on the kind of places you are talking about." "I am not asking you to split rent. I am asking you to build a home with me." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "I know the money thing is complicated. I know it creates an imbalance. But I do not want to live without you anymore, Fiona. These nights when I go home alone and you go to your place, I hate them. I want to fall asleep next to you. I want to wake up and see you stealing all the blankets. I want to come home to you." Fiona's eyes were wet. "You are assuming I steal blankets. Am I wrong?" She laughed through her tears. "No, you are absolutely right. I am a blanket hog." She took a shaky breath. "This is crazy. We have known each other for 3 months. I know. People are going to say I am with you for your money. Let them say it. I know the truth. I have never lived with anyone before. What if I am terrible at it? What if we drive each other crazy?" Xavier pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "Then we will figure it out together." "Say yes, Fiona." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, you insane man. Yes." They found a place in Lincoln Park, a brownstone with original hardwood floors and a small backyard that Fiona immediately started planning to turn into a garden. It was not as expensive as Xavier's penthouse, but still far more than Fiona could have afforded on her own, and he could see her struggling with that reality. They had their first real fight about it when she insisted on contributing something to the household expenses. "I make a fraction of what you make," Fiona said, her voice tight. "I know that. But I am not a charity case, Xavier. I need to feel like I am contributing. You are contributing. You are making this place feel like somewhere I actually want to be. That is not the same as paying bills." Xavier took a breath, forcing himself to stay calm even though her stubbornness was frustrating him. "What if you pay for groceries and I handle rent and utilities? That is not even remotely equal. Fiona, nothing about our financial situations is equal. We both know that. But this is not about money. This is about us building a life together. Can you let me do this without turning it into a fight?" She stared at him, jaw set, and for a moment Xavier thought she was going to walk out. Then her shoulders sagged. "I am not good at accepting help. I have been on my own for so long." "You are not on your own anymore," Xavier said gently, "and I am not trying to take care of you like you are helpless. I am trying to build something with you. There is a difference." Fiona nodded slowly. "Okay. But I am paying for groceries, and I am cooking most nights because we both know you are terrible at it." Xavier smiled. "Deal." Moving in together was an adjustment. Fiona had not been kidding about being a blanket thief. She also left coffee cups on every surface and could not remember to put the cap back on the toothpaste to save her life. Xavier was obsessively neat and had a hard time relaxing when there was clutter. But they learned each other's rhythms, compromised on the small things, and found that living together was easier than either of them had feared. Fiona's parents visited for her birthday as planned, and Xavier was more nervous meeting them than he had been for any business meeting in his life. Richard and Martha Fairchild were warm and funny, and they clearly adored their daughter. Over dinner at an Italian restaurant Fiona loved, her father asked Xavier about his intentions. "Dad," Fiona said, mortified, "we are not in a Jane Austen novel." "I am just asking a reasonable question," Richard said mildly. "My daughter is living with a man who is reportedly worth several $1 billion. I think I have a right to make sure he is serious about her." Xavier appreciated the directness. "I love your daughter, sir. I know it has not been that long, but I have never been more certain about anything. She makes me want to be better than I am." Martha reached over and patted his hand. "That is a good answer." Later, when they were alone washing dishes while Fiona showed her parents the garden, Martha said quietly, "She has been hurt before. Not seriously, but enough times that she stopped believing someone could really choose her. You should know that." "I am choosing her every day," Xavier said. "Good. Keep doing that." On Fiona's birthday, Xavier took her to dinner at an exclusive restaurant where he had rented out the entire place for the evening. Fiona wore a dark green dress that made her hair look like fire, and Xavier could barely focus on the food. "This is too much," Fiona said, looking around at the empty restaurant, the string quartet playing softly in the corner. "Xavier, this whole place just for us. Today is about celebrating you. I wanted you to have my complete attention." "You could have done that at home for free," she pointed out, but she was smiling. After dinner, Xavier drove them to the lakefront. It was October, chilly enough that Fiona wrapped his jacket around her shoulders as they walked along the beach. The city lights reflected off the water, and Xavier thought about that voicemail 6 months ago that had changed everything. "I need to tell you something," Xavier said, stopping and turning to face her. Fiona looked up at him, curious. "That sounds ominous." "I am not good at this. Relationships, feelings, any of it. I spent most of my adult life convinced I did not need anyone, that I was better off alone. Then I got your voicemail by mistake, and it was like something clicked into place that I did not even know was out of alignment. He took her hands, feeling her cold fingers in his. You make me laugh. You call me out when I am being ridiculous. You made my house feel like a home. I do not want to do any of this without you. Xavier, Fiona said softly, what are you saying? He pulled out the ring he had been carrying around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. It was a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, because Fiona had mentioned once that she found traditional diamond solitaires boring. I am saying marry me. Be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy. Fiona stared at the ring, then at him, her eyes wide and shining with tears. You are proposing. We have been together for 6 months. I know. Is that a no? It is a are you completely insane? We barely know each other. Xavier felt his heart sink. Fiona. But yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, you crazy man. Yes, I will marry you. He slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her there on the beach with the cold wind whipping around them and the waves crashing against the shore. Fiona threw her arms around his neck, and Xavier lifted her off her feet, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. I love you, Xavier said against her hair. I should have said that first. I love you so much. I love you too, Fiona said. Even though you are absolutely insane proposing this fast. They told her parents the next morning before Richard and Martha flew back to Oregon. Her mother cried and hugged them both. Her father shook Xavier's hand with a grip that was probably meant to be intimidating, but just made Xavier like him more. The engagement did not stay private for long. Someone at the restaurant must have recognized Xavier and tipped off the press, because by the end of the week, there were photos of them on the beach and headlines about the billionaire CEO's surprise engagement to a florist. Xavier's publicist Karen called him in a panic, demanding to know why she had not been given advance notice so she could craft a proper media strategy. Because my proposal was not a media event, Xavier said. It was private. Nothing about your life is private when you are worth what you are worth, Karen said. We need to get ahead of this. I have already gotten 3 interview requests from major publications. No interviews. Xavier, people are going to speculate. They are going to dig into Fiona's past, make assumptions about why you are together. If you do not control the narrative, someone else will. Xavier looked at Fiona, who was curled up on their couch with a book, seemingly unbothered by the media attention. She caught him looking and made a silly face at him. His heart squeezed. No interviews, he repeated to Karen. Issue a simple statement confirming the engagement and asking for privacy. That is it, Karen sighed. You are making my job very difficult. I pay you to make my job easier, not the other way around. The media attention was intense for about 2 weeks, then faded to occasional mentions in gossip columns. Fiona handled it better than Xavier expected, mostly by ignoring it entirely. When her shop got a sudden influx of curious customers, hoping to see the woman who had snagged Xavier Montgomery, she treated them the same as her regular clients, and most of them ended up actually buying flowers. You are taking this remarkably well, Xavier said one night as they watched an entertainment news segment that speculated wildly about their relationship. What am I supposed to do? Freak out every time someone says something about us? Fiona shrugged. I know why I am with you. You know why you are with me. Everyone else can think whatever they want. Xavier pulled her into his lap, marveling at her. How are you this well-adjusted? Oh, I am not, Fiona said. I have plenty of issues. I just do not care what strangers think of me. They started planning the wedding, which immediately became more complicated than either of them wanted. Xavier's business connections expected invitations. Fiona wanted something small and intimate. They compromised on a medium-sized ceremony at a vineyard outside the city, small enough to feel personal but large enough to include the people who mattered to both of them. The months between engagement and wedding were busy. Xavier's company launched the new drug they had been developing, which was a massive success and sent the stock price soaring. Fiona's shop got featured in a local magazine's roundup of best small businesses, and her customer base grew significantly. They were both working long hours, but they made time for each other, carving out evenings and weekends that were just for them. Xavier started spending more time in the research side of his company, making good on what Fiona had said months ago about figuring out what he really wanted. He brought in a talented executive to handle more of the day-to-day operations, freeing himself up to work with the scientists on new projects. It was the happiest he had been with his work in years. "You seem different," his father said during one of their quarterly dinners that Xavier attended more out of obligation than desire. "Lighter." "I am engaged," Xavier said. "I am happy." His father made a non-committal sound. "Marriage is not all romance and poetry, it is work, compromise." "Are you sure you are ready for that?" Xavier thought about Fiona arguing with him about the best way to load the dishwasher, about her stealing his favorite sweatshirt and wearing it until it smelled like her perfume, about the way she kissed him goodbye every morning like she meant it. "I have never been more ready for anything," Xavier said. The wedding took place on a perfect April day with cherry blossoms blooming at the vineyard. Fiona wore a simple ivory dress with her hair down in loose curls, and when Xavier saw her walking down the aisle with her father, he actually felt his eyes sting with tears. She was breathtaking. They had written their own vows. Fiona went first, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Xavier, you called me back when anyone else would have just deleted a wrong voicemail. You saw me when I was at my most stressed and messy, and somehow you decided that was someone worth knowing. You make me feel brave enough to dream bigger than I ever thought possible. I promise to love you, to support you, to steal your sweatshirts, and to never let you take yourself too seriously. I choose you today and every day after." Xavier took a breath, trying to keep his own emotions under control. "Fiona, your voice on that voicemail felt like coming home, and I did not even know I was lost until I heard it. You have taught me that success is not just about building companies and making money. It is about building a life with someone who makes you want to be better. You make me laugh. You challenge me. You love me even when I am being impossible. I promise to cherish you, to choose you every single day, to always call you back, and to make sure you never have to face a broken-down car alone again." Fiona laughed through her tears at that last part. The officiant declared them married, and Xavier kissed his wife thoroughly enough that their guests started cheering. The reception was perfect in that chaotic, joyful way that good weddings are. Xavier danced with Fiona, with her mother, with his elderly Aunt Patricia, who pinched his cheek and told him he had finally done something right. Fiona threw her bouquet directly at her assistant Emma, who caught it with a shocked expression. Late in the evening, Xavier found Fiona on the veranda overlooking the vineyard, taking a quiet moment alone. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Hi, husband," Fiona said, leaning back against him. "Hi, wife." He kissed her temple. "Having a good day, the best day." She turned in his arms to face him. "Thank you for calling me back. Thank you for having a voice that felt like it was everything I had been missing." They stood there swaying gently to the music drifting out from the reception, and Xavier thought about how one random voicemail had led to this. To her, to a life he had not known he needed. "What are you thinking about?" Fiona asked. "About how I almost did not call you back. I sat there replaying your message, telling myself it was weird and inappropriate. If I had listened to that voice, I would have missed all of this. But you did not listen to it, Fiona said. You took a chance on a wrong number. Best decision I ever made. They honeymooned in Italy. 2 weeks of wine and pasta and long walks through ancient cities. Xavier had been to Italy dozens of times for business, but he had never really seen it. Fiona made him slow down, made him notice the details he usually rushed past. They got lost in Venice and stumbled upon a tiny restaurant where the owner's mother cooked them the best meal Xavier had ever eaten. They watched the sunset from their hotel balcony in Positano and made love with the windows open and the sound of the sea filling the room. I do not want to go back, Fiona said on their last night, curled against Xavier's chest. We could stay. I could work remotely. You would go insane within a week, Fiona said, but she sounded tempted. Probably, Xavier admitted, but it would be a good week. They flew back to Chicago and settled into married life, which turned out to be remarkably similar to their life before the wedding, except now, Xavier got to call Fiona his wife, which gave him an absurd amount of pleasure. They fell into routines, learned to navigate each other's moods and bad days, built the kind of partnership that only comes from daily choosing each other. 6 months into their marriage, Fiona came home from a doctor's appointment looking dazed. Xavier was in his home office on a conference call, but something about her expression made him cut the call short. What happened? Are you okay? I am pregnant, Fiona said. Xavier stared at her. They had talked about kids in an abstract, someday kind of way, but had not been actively trying. You are sure, very sure, about 8 weeks along, apparently. She sat down heavily on the couch. I thought I just had a stomach bug. I did not even consider this as a possibility. How do you feel about it? Xavier asked carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. Fiona looked up at him and her face broke into a huge smile. Terrified, excited, completely overwhelmed. You, Xavier crossed to her, kneeling in front of the couch and taking her hands. All of those things, but mostly grateful. You are going to be an amazing mother. You are going to be an amazing father, Fiona said. Even though you are absolutely going to try to organize the nursery with color-coded labels. I was literally just thinking about labeling systems, Xavier admitted, and Fiona burst out laughing. The pregnancy was hard. Fiona had brutal morning sickness that lasted all day for the first 4 months. Xavier worked from home as much as possible, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, holding her hair back when she was sick, feeling helpless in the face of her misery. I am never doing this again, Fiona said one particularly bad day, lying on the bathroom floor. One and done, that is it. Whatever you want, Xavier said, rubbing her back. But once the morning sickness finally passed, Fiona bloomed. She glowed with health and happiness, her belly growing round. Xavier could not keep his hands off her, constantly touching her stomach, talking to the baby, marveling at the life they had created together. They found out they were having a girl, and Xavier watched Fiona cry happy tears at the ultrasound. He felt something shift in his chest, a fierce, protective love for this tiny person he had not even met yet. We are going to have a daughter, Fiona said, wonder in her voice. We are going to have a daughter, Xavier repeated, trying to wrap his mind around it. They turned one of their spare bedrooms into a nursery, painting it a soft yellow because Fiona refused to do pink, and Xavier refused to do anything gendered anyway. They assembled furniture and washed tiny clothes and read parenting books that mostly just made them more anxious. Fiona worked at the shop until she was 8 months pregnant, stubborn about not slowing down until Emma and Xavier teamed up to convince her that maybe climbing ladders to reach high shelves while very pregnant was not the best idea. She grumbled but agreed to take maternity leave, spending her days nesting and reorganizing everything in their house multiple times. Their daughter arrived 3 weeks early on a snowy February night. Fiona's water broke while they were watching a movie, and Xavier managed to stay calm enough to time contractions and drive them to the hospital without panicking. Then labor started, and Xavier discovered that watching the woman you love in pain while being completely unable to help was the worst form of torture imaginable. "I hate you for doing this to me," Fiona gasped during a particularly bad contraction. "I know. I am sorry. You are doing amazing. Do not patronize me or I will murder you." Xavier wisely kept his mouth shut after that, just holding her hand and letting her squeeze hard enough to cut off circulation. After 18 hours of labor, their daughter came into the world screaming her displeasure at the whole situation. "She has your lungs," Xavier said, and Fiona laughed exhaustedly. They named her Grace Martha Montgomery after Xavier's mother and Fiona's. She was tiny and perfect and had her father's dark hair and her mother's nose. Xavier held her for the first time and felt his entire world reorganize itself around this 8-pound human. "Hi, Grace," he whispered. "I am your dad. I have been waiting to meet you." Grace opened her eyes, dark blue and unfocused, and Xavier fell completely in love for the second time in his life. The first few months were brutal. Grace was a terrible sleeper, and Xavier and Fiona walked around in a fog of exhaustion, taking shifts through the night to rock and feed and change diapers. Xavier had never been so tired in his life. He also had never been so happy. He took paternity leave, something the board was not thrilled about but that Xavier insisted on. He spent his days learning how to be a father, how to swaddle and burp and soothe. Fiona was an amazing mother, patient and loving even when she was running on 2 hours of sleep. They worked as a team, supporting each other through the hardest moments, celebrating tiny victories like when Grace slept for 4 hours straight. "We made a person," Fiona said one night, both of them watching Grace sleep in her bassinet. "We made a person," Xavier agreed. "How is that even real?" "I have no idea." Grace got easier as she grew. She started sleeping longer stretches, smiling and laughing, developing her own little personality. She was curious and determined, traits she had clearly inherited from both parents. Xavier was obsessed with her, taking thousands of photos, boring anyone who would listen with stories about her latest developmental milestone. Fiona went back to work when Grace was 4 months old, but only part-time. They hired a nanny named Susan, who Grace immediately adored. Xavier rearranged his schedule to be home for dinner every night, something he never would have done before Fiona and Grace. His priorities had shifted. Work was still important, but it was not everything anymore. On their second wedding anniversary, Xavier arranged for Susan to watch Grace overnight so he could take Fiona to the same vineyard where they had gotten married. They had dinner at the small restaurant on the property, and afterward walked through the gardens holding hands. "Thank you for calling me back," Fiona said, echoing what she had said on their wedding day. "Thank you for leaving that voicemail," Xavier replied. "Best wrong number in history. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not called, if we had never met?" Xavier pulled her close, thinking about his life before Fiona. The empty penthouse, the endless work, the sense that something was missing even though he had everything he thought he wanted. "I think I would have kept building my empire and convincing myself I did not need anything else. I would have been successful and lonely and never even realized there was another way to live." He kissed her softly. "You saved me from that life, Fiona. You and Grace, you are everything." "We got pretty lucky," Fiona said. "A misdirected voicemail could have just been a funny story." Instead, it was the beginning of all of this. Some things are meant to be. They stood there in the garden where they had promised forever to each other, and Xavier thought about the unlikely series of events that had led them here. A car breaking down, a wrong number, a decision to call back a stranger because her voice felt like something he needed. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," Fiona replied. "Now take me back to our room and remind me what life was like before we were too exhausted for romance." Xavier laughed and did exactly that. Years passed in that way time does when you are happy, both too fast and exactly right. Grace grew from a baby to a toddler to a little girl with her mother's spirit and her father's determination. She loved flowers and science in equal measure, spending time at Fiona's shop, arranging her own bouquets and visiting Xavier's office to ask the scientists endless questions about what they were working on. Fiona's business grew. She opened a second location, then a third, building a small empire of her own. Xavier was so proud of her he could barely contain it, bragging about her success to anyone who would listen. She had done it all herself, turned her passion into something real and sustainable. Xavier continued to balance running his company with spending time in the research division. He published several papers, mentored young scientists, remembered why he had fallen in love with the work in the first place. He was still successful, still driven, but it no longer defined him completely. On Grace's 5th birthday, they had a party in their backyard with way too many kids, and a bouncy castle that Xavier was fairly certain violated several safety regulations, but made his daughter deliriously happy. Fiona stood next to him watching the chaos, and Xavier slipped his arm around her waist. "We did pretty good," he said. "We did amazing," Fiona corrected. "Look at her. She is so happy." Grace ran over to them, dragging along another little girl. "Daddy, Mommy, this is my best friend Hannah. Can she come over for a sleepover? We will talk about it with her parents," Fiona said diplomatically. Grace grinned and ran off, already on to the next adventure. Xavier watched her go, this incredible human he and Fiona had created and were raising. "Do you ever miss it?" Fiona asked quietly. "Your old life, when things were simpler and you did not have a wife and kid taking up all your time." Xavier looked at her like she was insane. "Are you serious?" "Fiona, my old life was empty. I did not even know how empty until I had this to compare it to. You and Grace, this life we built together, it is everything. I have never been happier." "Good answer," Fiona said, but he could hear the relief in her voice. "You are it for me," Xavier said, turning to face her fully. "You were it for me from the moment I called you back. Everything else is just details." Fiona kissed him, soft and sweet, and Xavier thought about that voicemail one more time, the one that had started everything. The wrong number that had turned out to be exactly right. He had been sitting in his office alone, convinced he had everything he needed. Then he had heard her voice, breaking with stress and humanity, and something in him had recognized something in her. He had called back on impulse, following an instinct he did not understand, and it had changed his entire life. That night, after the party was cleaned up and Grace was asleep, exhausted from her big day, Xavier and Fiona sat on their back porch with glasses of wine. The yard was a mess of deflated balloons and forgotten toys, but neither of them cared. "We should probably clean that up," Fiona said without moving. "Tomorrow," Xavier said. "Tonight, let's just sit here." So they did, talking about nothing and everything, comfortable in the silence between words. This was love, Xavier thought. Not just the grand gestures and passionate moments, though those mattered too, but this quiet contentment, this feeling of being exactly where you were supposed to be with exactly who you were supposed to be with. "What are you thinking about?" Fiona asked, reading his contemplative expression. "About how I almost deleted your voicemail," Xavier admitted. "I had my finger on the button. I was going to clear it and move on with my day. Something made me listen to it one more time instead. Fate, Fiona said. Luck, divine intervention. Probably just a random impulse, Xavier said. But whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day. Me too, Fiona said softly. Me too. They sat there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Xavier felt a peace he had never known existed before Fiona. He had spent so much of his life chasing success, proving himself, building something that would last. But this, right here, was what lasting really meant. Not companies or money or achievements. This connection with another person, this family they had built together. This love that started with a wrong number and grew into everything that mattered. Grace called out from inside, asking for water, and Fiona stood to go to her. Xavier watched his wife disappear into the house, heard her gentle voice soothing their daughter, and smiled. He had made a lot of good decisions in his life, had taken risks that paid off, had worked harder than anyone else, had built something he could be proud of. But calling back a stranger whose voice felt like it was the missing piece he did not know he needed, that was the best decision he had ever made. Everything else, all the happiness and love and meaning in his life, had flowed from that single moment of impulse. Xavier Montgomery, billionaire CEO who planned everything and took calculated risks, had followed his instinct for once and found something infinitely more valuable than any business deal or stock price. He had found home.